I know you're busy. This is something you've not heard about LSA. Today, we've got Corey Vandenberg of Clixy, and you're going to understand what you need to know and what's changed about LSA. Tune in now. Here's kind of a question we talked about at dinner a few weeks ago, which might be controversial. What do you think about the PIs that are opening multiple GMBs or are covering multiple service areas for their GMB?
My approach to the marketing world, I think a lot of people have sort of fetishized Google as though it is a quasi-governmental entity. And so they kind of have almost this sense of reverence for the terms of service. My reverence is for the client. And so I kind of take an approach that I call a lot like a doctor's Hippocratic oath. My oath is to do no harm to the client. So as it relates to GBPs and opening them up, I will advise them and I will let them know that technically speaking, it's against the terms of service, and that there are certain things that Google might look for to eventually suspend them. I don't see it as like problematic in the sense that it might be, say, misleading the public or anything like that. I think Google has set up the parameters of the game, so to speak. And I think to an extent, it's really not that great of a system to have a GBP only have 5 or 10 miles of visibility. So I'm okay with it so long as the client is apprised of the risk.
Okay. So there's been a lot of LSA spam, and
that's a big problem,
especially in like locksmith, home services, and now we're seeing this in PI. What do we need to know for PIs to not be, suspended or not get in trouble or determine if our agency is doing something scammy or that would get us in trouble with our LSA?
I think as it relates just to LSA, because obviously GBP spam is a whole rabbit hole we could go down, but as it relates to LSA, where I've seen the biggest challenges with spam has been in the home services niche. And I think the thing that is most abused is verified reviews. Google has created kind of a very not very transparent system for how reviews work with LSA, because what most people don't really understand is that there's sort of almost like a Siamese twin relationship between the GBP and the LSA as like profiles. So they're like linked at the hip, but they are distinct. And so when you leave a review on a GBP, oftentimes by design, it's supposed to reflect on the LSA. Then in addition to that, there is a function within LSA to request and acquire more reviews. It's a one-way street. So to the extent you get them on an LSA, they never, ever will ever show up on your GBP. They will only ever exist on the LSA profile. So as a result, what the spammers have done is they've kind of figured out some loopholes. And what they're doing is not only are they mass spamming positive reviews, they're going after, in some cases, competitors and spamming negative reviews on their LSA. I think that what you can do to protect yourself or at least not get suspended, obviously, is ensure, number one, that you're always obtaining legitimate reviews from real people. I would recommend, if you can afford it, and by afford it, I mean, are you generating enough new reviews in a given month? I would recommend about a 90-10 split of 90% of your reviews go to your GBP and 1 out of 10 send over to that LSA to get a verified review. And I think as long as they're legitimate, I don't think you're going to run into issues with spam problems.
Yeah. So what if I'm bidding in a highly competitive market and other PIs are ahead of me in LSA, but I have more reviews or have a better star rating, yet they're still ahead of me? Why might that be?
There are a number of ranking factors that affect LSA visibility. So my answers kind of have to be parsed out in terms of what Google's told us versus what have we observed through the data? Like, what's our experience? What Google has told us is that LSA visibility is primarily driven by what they call responsiveness reviews. and proximity. So, how responsive are you to the leads? And that's somewhat of a vague term because they don't define it perfectly. Mm-hmm. Reviews is kind of the most obvious. It's like the more you get. And I personally think velocity matters more mm-hmm. than total number.
Yeah.
And then proximity has to do with.
So we said velocity, just for everyone else to know, like the number of reviews you've had in the last 3 months versus all time is more important.
I think so.
Or the other experts are saying 1 month, or some are saying 3 months, but some window like that.
Correct. Yep. Okay. And I think this is the gospel according to Corey. I think that what they're measuring you against is probably a mixture of your own track history, right? Mm-hmm. So it might be detrimental to go from 1 a week to 20 a week.
Because it looks suspicious. Yeah.
It looks very suspicious. But I also think there may be somewhat of a cohort analysis too, where they're saying like, what's customary for this type of business in this type of area?
Yeah. I've got friends that work at Google, and of course we play this game because I used to work at Yahoo and I was on the other side for a while. And we would say that SEO or even things like LSA there's not any one factor. Like you and I know people will obsess over like one factor, like number of calls responded to within 30 seconds, which I agree is a key factor. But we said that Google looks at things like a lie detector test. And it's not just one factor, but if many things like the way you blink or your tone or your eye or your skin temperature, or like if multiple of these things are not in line, then they think that you are lying or you are trying to trick them.
Google lawyers in particular have a phrase that's used oftentimes in legal parlance, and it's the totality of the circumstances. Or if we're talking about a contract, the four corners of the document. In other words, we're going to take everything into account, and all of those things have some weight in the matter. The factors Google has given us to determine visibility for your LSA is the responsiveness, reviews, and proximity. To get a little bit more granular, let's delve into each one of those. I think that responsiveness, in our experience, can best be optimized by answering live as fast as possible. We give under 30 seconds as a guideline, but if you can answer live in one ring, that's probably as good as you can get.
Yeah.
As far as reviews, what we suggest is at a minimum 1 a week. If you can obtain more, do so. And I think, again, it makes sense to kind of look at and at least consider what's customary for you and your industry, and
the competitors, which is the industry, but more importantly, the direct competitors in your city.
100%. Right. There is, and I think you may know Curtis Boyd from Transparency Company. I think there is something to be said for keeping a little bit of an eye on fake reviews, and in a really egregious situation, it might make sense to report a competitor to Google if you know that they're abusing the review system. But otherwise, I would advise to just beat them by being better.
Yeah. I've seen some folks buy fake reviews and then report the competitor. Buy fake reviews on behalf, which is kind of an extension of Google bowling, like the dirty SEO tactics, like buying porn links for the competitor.
Yeah. The good old negative SEO days. That just incentivizes that behavior. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that to whatever extent Google ever has done that, they probably have to back it off pretty quickly because it gets abused. So with respect to, out of the 3 ranking factors Google's told us about, the one that I think is somewhat, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like it's clear that how to be responsiveness is to act faster and respond to the leads. Getting more reviews is pretty clear on its face. But with proximity, I think I have a little bit of an unconventional take from looking at the data. I think that what has worked in the past is I think that Google may have shifted that algorithm to where it used to be the case that there was an advantage to do what we talked about earlier with the GBPs, where they're opening up all these locations with LSA. for a time, I think that worked. And then it just got really out of hand. And I think Google's pendulum has swung the other direction. And so we're now actually seeing better results from having broader targeting for fewer locations. There were a lot of law firms that were abusing this, especially in California. And so I think the pendulum has kind of swung the other direction. Google, for a time, was advising, and they actually built an internal tool for detecting when two LSAs overlapped. And we're on a elevated tier of Google support for LSA. So we have like real-time communication with our LSA rep. Yep. And she was messaging us and saying, so-and-so's profile is overlapping, and you're getting more than one showing up, and you better take care of that because it could get you suspended. So we would go in and we would change all that stuff, frantically. And then one day I saw a competitor actually here in Utah where they had two LSAs showing up in the carousel. And so I messaged our support rep and I said, hey, do your thing. Take care of that for us, if you would. And they said, oh, no, that's not a problem. That's okay. And I'm like, explain for me, help me understand why. And they said, oh, well, as long as it's a different bar license, the same brand can overlap their targeting. And so that right there was a clue for me that they had already made some internal changes to address this problem, and that it was well known all the way to the top, because they wouldn't have created that exception had it not been something they were talking about already. But then we followed their advice. We went out to all our clients who had multiple locations. We got a unique bar license for everyone, and we overlapped all the targeting everywhere. And
that just seems, you told me this
down
a few months ago, and that just seems completely bizarre, because one of the biggest no-nos is overlapping LSAs, because you're going to get suspended for that. But now you're telling me you've done this for multiple law firms and for however long, and they've not gotten in trouble.
No in trouble. And I verified it with several of the Google support reps. They've all said it's within terms of service as long as it's a unique bar license. However, the performance went down despite having greater visibility, so-called. So, we are very proactive. Like a lot of agencies will preach testing, but I think it's lip service oftentimes. And we are constantly looking at what else could improve our results for our clients. And so we found a really interesting situation where an LSA account, so a firm with multiple locations, has multiple LSAs and multiple GBPs, and an LSA from a southern location had been linked to a GBP in a northern location. So it was mismatched. They actually had two LSAs going to that same one.
Right.
And when we caught it, we went to Google and said, hey, you need to untether these and associate it with the correct GBP. And that's when Google told us, oh, we also noticed that your name, address, and phone number doesn't match. And I said, well, that's kind of like a local SEO thing, right? The whole NAP. Right. And they said, no, that's an important thing for LSA. So, we're constantly Google. I like to say that Google's a game of telephone, because you can talk to two different reps and get two different answers. So again, it goes back to that whole taking in the preponderance of evidence. You got to ask and ask and ask until you go, all right, I think I know the truth, because I've now had it from, 5 or 6 different people at Google.
So Corey, you said that according to Google, responsiveness and reviews and proximity are the main 3, but then you have this interpretation between the lines of what actually is important. So how would you retranslate that?
Yeah. So I think that responsiveness is, I think that the various factors that go into that is answering the phone fast, like we've already discussed, but also I think it's being evaluated on sort of the quantity. So I like to use the baseball analogy that if you want to raise your batting average, the only way to do that is to get more at bats. And so what oftentimes happens is that LSA becomes this sort of snowball effect where you have poor responsiveness, so you get fewer leads. So you have poor responsiveness and you get fewer leads. So turn on message leads, respond to them as fast as possible, and turn on 24/7 ads so that you're getting as many opportunities as possible. And then in really, really difficult situations, we've advised clients to turn on what are called general law queries, which is where you're now qualifying for lawyer and lawyer near me and that kind of thing, solely for the purpose of getting the at bat so that they have the opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's worked. We've resurrected some dead LSA accounts. And then later on, we're able to get them dialed into where it's only the category they want. With reviews, my reading between the lines would be that distinction of velocity mattering the most and the analysis of your industry and your market locally.
Yeah.
With proximity, I would say that what's working now, and I reserve the right to change this when the data says otherwise, what's working now is having one LSA or fewer LSAs where you can target a broader area and concentrate the velocity of your reviews to those fewer listings. I think that's one area where a lot of these firms get tripped up is they saw the dollar signs and so they went big on LSA, and now they have 6 or 8 of them. And they're so diluted between all their reviews that they can't possibly meet that standard.
So where do we draw the line then, Corey? Because that's interesting, because on one hand, you can have many legitimate GBP profiles with LSAs. On the other hand, you said that you could have, LSAs with multiple, you can have overlapping LSAs. So each LSA is covering more and more cities. Where do you draw the line between overlap, having more GBPs versus just covering more territories, or just having 7 offices that all completely overlap each other? Because you said if you do that, you've noticed that performance goes down when you have overlapping LSAs, which what you'd expect.
So
is it because you're competing with yourself, or is there something else happening?
Well, yeah, let me try and break that down, because there's a lot to unpack there. I think probably the first, maybe approach it like this. If I was given that hypothetical scenario, what thoughts would I go through to analyze the situation and advise them? So the first thing I would look at is, where do they have the most reviews, and where do they currently what's home base, so to speak. Right. So, if home base is St. Louis, and they also happen to have another GBP down here that has 30 reviews, but this other one has 400, well, we're going to start there, because I think it has the most social proof already, the most equity in it, in terms of reviews and social proof. Yeah. And then what I'm probably going to advise them is, for at least for maybe 90 days, or just a period that we both agree upon, we're going to test targeting the whole area with that one GBP. And then if they get to a point, this goes back to my comment about being able to afford bifurcating your reviews. Mm-hmm. So if that strategy works, and maybe they're getting more cases on average, and so then they say, gosh, we're able to send 4 or 5 reviews to this GBP. Mm-hmm. Well, then it might make sense to start peeling off a small percentage of those towards that other one, in preparation for the day that it makes sense. I would also say probably and this is an arbitrary number I'm just going to pick out of the air, right, based on my experience, is I probably think there should be at least around a 50-mile gap between them. I think you should at least be targeting right around 50 miles for a singular GBP before you start thinking about really overlapping them a lot.
So let's say that I have an office in Milwaukee and in Chicago, and that is like a 2-hour drive, in between, depending on the traffic. Yeah. And let's say that Milwaukee was my home base and I have the most reviews there. That's my home office. When would I have it, try to lean on my Chicago location versus try to extend the Milwaukee location out?
I think it's probably the biggest factor is going to come down to reviews. How many are coming in from Milwaukee, and does it make sense to build up Chicago off of Milwaukee? And they're probably far enough apart that you could probably do them simultaneously and just then make your analysis off the data.
Yeah.
If Chicago's not performing well, then your next test should be expanding Milwaukee's targeting.
So I can retranslate what you're saying into, if I was inside the mind of Google and I wanted to show the best firm for that user's query, it would be, sometimes I want to show the one that's closest to me, but if there's another one that's better or has more reviews or is stronger, I as Google might want to show one that's 50 miles away, because it's in certain categories, especially PI, people are willing to go further than their local Italian restaurant or something that they expect a more local search.
100%.
And that's why you're saying proximity is worth less than it used to be.
Yeah, I think going back to your analogy or way of phrasing, the totality of the data, right? There's no one factor. So proximity is a factor, but so is all the other stuff. And so Google might be looking at that searcher in Chicago, and they might also be evaluating their search history. I'm confident they are. I think they're for sure looking at their search history.
Yeah.
And maybe their Google Maps. So maybe that particular person drives to Milwaukee pretty frequently.
For that user even. Yeah. Especially if they commute. It's interesting, personalized to that. And maybe the Google Analytics of the law firm and seeing where their traffic and cases are coming from. Yeah.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Again, this is one of those times I'll always disclaim when I'm going off into my own speculative gospel according to Corey.
Well, Google will say that they don't use GA data in ads or whatnot. They say that.
I'll buy that.
I used to say that when I was at Yahoo, but I know what's actually going on because I ran analytics. So I know we do use that data.
I know it. And, Dennis, I shared, when we went to dinner, I shared a little bit about my background of how we got into personal injury in the first place.
Yeah.
And full transparency, it was a black hat tactic and it died on the vine eventually. But at the time, what I discovered, and when I say I should say my partner discovered this, but collectively what we figured out is that user interactions is absolutely a part of the algorithm.
Yep.
And I remember Rand Fishkin doing a similar test where he put out on Twitter, hey, I have a hunch, everybody go search this term and click on this blog post. And
it worked.
It zipped right to the top. So they're for sure using both Search Console and analytics data.
Yeah.
So all of that pretext is for me to say that I think I think a similar relationship exists between GBP and LSA. I think, and I will add a little asterisk to that. I think brand plays a really significant role in local rankings and LSA rankings. And I'll tell you why. I have a broad spectrum of clients that go from very, very large law firms with extremely prominent national brands, that household names, to very small firms. And these things we talk about with LSA, such as proximity reviews, and there are known penalties associated with sort of violating them or not meeting the bar. For example, if you get a missed call in LSA, Google has told us in plain language that the algorithm demerits them for 61 days.
Wow. What does that mean, demerits them for 61 days?
I mean, I don't know how to quantify it. I don't know how to say that you get, I don't know, you're deducted 10 algorithm points or something. I don't know. All we know is that you're placed into a category of having had a missed call and that lasts for 61 days. Well, I've seen the big brand accounts and the little brand accounts. And I can tell you that so-called 61-day period is weathered far better by the big brand accounts. Same thing with a negative review. according to Google, a negative review, which is categorized as anything under 5 stars, lands you in a 91-day sandbox. And I will see a big brand get a negative 1-star review and their performance is just flat. No effect.
Yeah.
I've seen a 1-star review kill a small firm LSA where there's just no coming back from it. You just, no matter what we do, we can't seem to get it to perform. And
because it's relative to the size of their review base. Yeah. When you only have 20 reviews, one negative review is 5%.
Correct. So I think it's their review base, but I also think there's some correlation to frequency of branded search.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I've never heard anyone say that before, Corey. I think that's super insightful, that Google's taking into account how strong your brand is, how well you're known, how many people are searching for your name. For sure, I'd figured, I don't know this because I don't work at the search engines and not for quite a while, but I think that's a killer factor.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look at, I don't know, it's right after Panda occurred and everyone was like, oh, they're just favoring Home Depot and Lowe's and Walmart. No, it's not that. The market is.
Yeah.
And Google is a reflection of the market in terms of search volume.
You know what's funny, Corey, is that we did a test with the world's largest furniture manufacturer, who's also the world's largest furniture retailer. And we were using our $1-a-day strategy promoting brand stories. And we saw the impact in GMB, well, now called GPP data. And I never really thought about why that was. I thought maybe it was that more people, it was Ashley Furniture. They changed their name to Ashley Home Store. We did this across many locations. So we have the data to show this. And I thought, well, they're using analytics data. And if we take good care of these customers and they come in store, which is a signal that we pass back to Google, because we were uploading offline conversions, we were optimizing for store visit on Facebook and other channels, that the social media advertising drove more brand search, drove more people into the store. And we think even that did create we couldn't tell exactly because that did drive an increase in sales because we were going for sales, like people going to the store buying furniture. But I think what you're saying about even independent of the increase in sales, the brand search, more people going into the store or into the office and the website data all reinforced our GMB rankings. I'm going on 15 years in this business. Every single time I work with a brand or a firm that has that type of share of voice, we see the exact same correlation. And I'm convinced that it has a role. And which brings me to sort of a pet theory that I have, which is that I think that small firms and medium-sized firms have an unprecedented opportunity right now to leverage a system like your content factory and the $1-a-day strategy to beat the TV and billboard firms at their own game. Because here's the problem that I see so frequently. I talk myself out of sales maybe more than I get into them, because I will tell firms, I don't think this is going to work for you. Yet you have folks like Mike Morse as a shining client.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, exactly.
So how's that? Right.
Yeah. So I can look at a firm like Mike, and as soon as we got him rankings, cases and calls and volume just popped. The same thing, I'll go and get a small firm ranked in the map pack. And we get them all kinds of visibility. They're getting more traffic. Their GBP metrics are up. Yeah, we haven't really felt it. And I'm not saying that happens every time. There's small firms that get good results from this.
Right.
However, I think it's somewhat market dependent. Branson, Missouri, or somewhere small. Right. I think map pack visibility is going to work a lot better than Manhattan. Right. Okay. And I think that the problem is this: you can be really visible, and if no one knows you, they won't choose you. Right.
And Google can see that if they show you, but there's no engagement. Yeah. Or whatever signals they can see.
So yeah, exactly. So if you're a big firm with a lot of brand that's built up and you rank well, well, then brand has at least some role in the conversion. They'll look at it and say, oh, I know that guy. So the SEO got you the eyeballs, but the brand got you the conversion.
Yeah.
To some degree. And I don't know how to measure that.
Because of branding and awareness and organic and all these other sort of signals. And what you said in the beginning, which I think is key for most PI folks to know, is that LSA is more about SEO than it is an advertising automated solution. Explain more about that.
Yeah, I think they're comparable in their characteristics. So I'm not necessarily suggesting there's a strong correlation between my site ranks well, so my LSAs do good. But rather, I'm saying that the nature of them, the characteristics they have, is that you influence them from the outside in with your behaviors.
Right.
By responding well, taking care of the customer, getting good reviews. All of those things have nothing to do with pushing a button inside LSA. Right.
It's
SEO,
less advertising. Yeah. It's more non-ad factors.
Correct. And so SEO in that same way is about being relevant, being informative, being educational, taking care of them through the content that you put out and demonstrating authoritativeness, expertise, trustworthiness, and experience, the new double EAT standard, right?
Yep.
And so outside in, not inside out. So the correlation, I think, between the two is, yes, they're similar in nature like that. And then I think in both ways, they are also affected by top of funnel, like I was just describing with the big firms like Mike versus some of the smaller firms. And so the opportunity that I'm talking about is, I think, with social video and the prevalence of it and the degree to which, especially the younger generation. The other day, the Gen Zs in my office, I asked them, I said, are you really using TikTok and Instagram as a way to find places to go eat lunch? Like, you're using it like a Google? And they were like, yep, we use it like a Google to find where we're going to go to lunch. I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. So when I look at that, I'm like, man, these small firms with a relatively modest budget, using something like the $1 a day strategy, could put together a really nice set of content and develop that brand awareness in a market as big or small as, like, I don't know, a 5-mile radius. Like, that's not that big, right?
Yeah.
Like, whereas
in the smaller markets, you can use social to dominate because there aren't strong brand signals.
Exactly.
Even if there's a big firm in the main city, 20 miles away, you're in the suburb, you can still dominate.
And here's another insight to that theory that I have. I was talking to one of my clients and they were telling me that the reason a lot of these TV firms run their ads during the daytime television, their theory is that the guy who's injured in a car accident is home from work, sitting on the couch and watching TV. So we want to catch him. I like to read between the lines. I tend to think that probably at least some factor is because that's just the cheapest media buy. But with social, you can be on 24/7 for way cheaper than cable.
Yeah.
Right. And so
if they're doing social video the correct way, like you said, just running social, blasting the TV commercial isn't going to work.
No. And I'm glad you brought that up. That is, every time I tell people this, that's exactly where they want to go. Oh, well, we've got our whole library.
They just copy all those commercials and then they come back and they tell me, throw it in my face and say, Dennis, I tried your $1 a day strategy. It didn't work.
Oh,
well, what did you put in the machine?
Yeah.
You put your TV ads in there and that's not, that's a fish out of water.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. It's not direct response, but I think the point stands that there is a tremendous small firm, medium-sized firm opportunity to beat the billboard firms using social video.
Yeah.
And I think that you should start thinking about things like LSA, SEO, and social as an ecosystem. Yeah. I know a lot of firms don't like to hear it, but we'll often say that it all works together. And a lot of them, I think, want to go back to the days of the phone book where they could have a tracking number and say, well, we had this much lift because of that ad. But there's just no question that your top of funnel affects your bottom of funnel.
Yeah. Amen. And just like you said, it's harder and harder to track these signals, yet we know they absolutely influence the LSA that we run. But law firms want to be able to track every single call, every single case through the call tracking number and whatnot. But it's harder, right? You saw iOS 14 and other things like Google Chrome, they're eliminating a lot of these signals and using AI to sort of tie these. Are you using special attribution to try to get more visibility, like third-party attribution tools?
No, I don't believe so. What's an example of that?
Oh, like a Hyros or Wicked Reports or any of those guys.
Gotcha. No, I mean, we have worked with a couple of specialty firms, like Measurement Marketing with Chris Mercer comes to mind.
But he's setting up more like the GA4 and the event tracking, as opposed to, actually, no, he does talk about things like running a UTM parameter. This is a little technical, but using UTM parameters to determine, the source of that traffic, and then setting a first party cookie, like your own first party cookie to tie retargeting, because Google Chrome and the AMP and all that is like, all third party cookies are going to die kind of thing.
Yeah. I do think, although it hasn't been a major emphasis for Clixy, I do think first party data is probably the most under-leveraged and biggest opportunity for most law firms. It's value sitting right under their noses, and they don't understand the value of it.
Yeah, especially more traffic that you're able to drive through website traffic and phone calls to own your own data. And then if you have strong first party data, you can pass it back to Google and Facebook through offline conversions. So it's more signals than just calls. Otherwise, they're just going to drive you more calls. And you're like, hey, I've got a bunch of bad quality calls. Well, that's your fault for not passing back the right signal.
Yep.
Beyond the call.
Yeah.
So Corey, you have a new book on LSA. Why now? And what are some of the key points in that book?
We originally set out to write it as sort of an ultimate guide. And we felt like, because we're so aggressive in testing, because we have such a vast access to the number of accounts, and so we see a lot of data, that we had some unique insights to add to the market. Because I think most, I sit and watch a lot of the videos that are published on YouTube about LSA, and the most of it is pretty common knowledge now, and it's all kind of being regurgitated. But I think we bring a unique perspective in that I can tell you, here's what official statements say, but here's what the data says.
Yeah.
And so I always like to hear from anybody else who has that similar type of perspective. The book itself, I don't have a title yet for it.
It'll be ready by August, though. We'll promote it in August.
Yes. What I'm hoping to do with that is I'm a big believer in giving value first. I was shocked at the number of people who have just called me randomly because of a lot of the insights in the book are actually on our YouTube channel. And I've started publishing some of those things. And I would say 3 or 4 times a week, I'll just get a random call. Hey, I watched that video. I really loved it. Man, you were super insightful. And I have this problem. Tell me what I should do.
Yeah.
And so I think that I have a soft spot for small business. So to me, LSA is the one area where I can help almost any sized business. Whereas SEO is at this point probably more apropos for a bigger budget. And so that's one reason why I wanted to do it.
Google's opening LSA to all these other categories, like dozens of new categories, like medical, that didn't exist before. Like dentists can now do LSA. I think it's going to be every category that has any kind of certification or license.
Well, since you bring it up, I agree with that. And I also have another one of my little speculations. When you look at the trend with Google, several years ago, they came out with featured snippets. And more and more and more, Google has been trending towards what we call zero click. They're just deriving the answer for you right there. And they don't want you to leave Google.
Yeah.
I sort of call that like Google serving up the answer for you, or done, kind of a Google done for you type.
Their new AI is doing that. The expansion of knowledge panels is putting everything there so you don't have to click on it. Google doesn't want to fix your slow website, so they're just going to extract everything.